I had a friend who was a serviceman in Iraq, and he was in the Air Force, but he did like on base stuff. He wasn't like a pilot or anything. And he was in Iraq like during some of the peak years in like the mid to late 2000s. And I remember when I first met him, I was kind of curious. I was also younger, and I didn't know exactly how to approach like, hey, what was Iraq like, because you want to be sensitive, and I don't know what I thought at the time. I'd had a bunch of friends who went over there and were in, more like combat positions and stuff, but I wasn't really talking to them at the time. And anyway, so I wanted to hear from this guy. And then, he told me that basically he spent the entire time on base. He never saw anything interesting or action-oriented. He told me most of the time they just played Call of Duty, which I thought was like pretty surreal and weird. But like the one detail I remember is he described like the food that they ate, at the base in Baghdad. This is actually something that I had meant to get into during the both the Bush episode and the when I was talking about the credit mobilier scandal, because this popped into my mind. But I don't know if you guys know what Cost Plus is. It was like a scheme that the government came up with Halliburton to milk a bunch of money out of the Iraq War. But
tell me if I'm wrong, but it's Cost Plus is basically a business model where there's a contract that's agreed upon between two entities, and the purchaser agrees to buy from the seller at whatever the seller's cost is plus an agreed upon margin. So for instance, if it's like 3% or something, then whatever, if it's $100 product that they purchase from the manufacturer, the distributor will charge $103, something like that.
Yeah, that's roughly what it is. The other provision of it, at least with the particular deal between Halliburton and the Pentagon, was that the Halliburton, similar to the credit mobilier scandal where we talked about, these guys created this sort of phony shell company as to position themselves as a contractor between the people who actually built that giant railroad, and then just artificially inflated the price. That's basically what Halliburton did in providing a bunch of civilian services in Iraq. They would say, like, we'll be in charge of supplying, in this case, the food for all the troops at the base, and the government was like, okay, well, we don't know how to do that, so Halliburton, you get to tell us how much that costs. And more so, there was also a provision that if the budget went over, like if Halliburton said, we're going to do this job for $1 million, but then it ended up costing like $1.2 million or whatever, the logic was baked into the contract that meant like, oh, well, that means they actually need even more money to actually do that job. So the next time we re-up it, we'll increase it even further beyond what they went. But if the original job was supposed to cost, say, $1 million, and then Halliburton spends 1.2, then the government the next time will automatically start the bid at like 1.5. So it's just an insane incentive, obviously, for the company to overspend. And what that looks like on the ground, and this is why I thought of it in terms of my friend, he told me that like every time they went to eat in Baghdad, it was just this like cornucopia of fucking options and this like insane 5-star buffet.
Wow.
And he was like a working class guy from, I think somewhere in Central California or something. He had never seen anything like this. And the particular detail that stuck with me is there was a whole station of just different flavored milks. So there were like 30 to 40 different milks that you could get, and then you could get them in any combination. So you could be like, I'll have strawberry milk, I'll have, this special like cherry chocolate milk, and, just these insane buffet options were available. It was their incentive to overspend.
Jesus.
But yeah, the land of milk and honey, quite literally.
Didn't you say it was like Kraft Foods that just alone made $1.1 billion off of the war in Iraq?
Yeah, that was in one single year.
Nice.
That was at least their contract, how much they got. What was the actual net profit off of that was another thing. I mean, a lot of companies got in on that in Iraq. I mean, Pepsi as well was a big one. Halliburton obviously made and its subsidiaries such as KBR made the bulk of like, sort of war profiteering, just because they were the contractors in between a lot of them. I mean, there's a lot of really famous examples of it where like, a single can of Coke would be, charged to the soldier or whatever, what it would normally be like in the United States, like $1 or so, or probably, translated into dinars or whatever. And then, but every can of Coke that they sold, they would charge to the American government like $100.
Yeah.
And they would in that they would count like security fees and like transport fees. And of course, the other side of this too, just from like a neo-colonial aspect, is like, this went for a whole number of services. Another one included like the laundry services were all done by KBR, and they were all done apparently quite poorly, from at least a lot of sort of anecdotal stories from soldiers on base who said that they would get like really scratchy laundry back because the laundry was done awfully. And there were like, of course, local businesses that were, within the green zone and sort of adjacent to the American occupying forces who were like very willing to take on those kinds of jobs, but were basically pushed out so that like KBR and Halliburton could take them over, charge a whole lot more. And then of course that just exacerbated the problem already of like, you had potentially, obviously the war was no good at all, but at least like even within the framework of the logic of that kind of imperial project, like you want to build a base of like people in the country who then are like loyal to you, and you build an economy based around your bases. Wow. And they didn't even do that. so just so that Halliburton and stuff could make a killing, quite literally. Again, that's maybe a whole other episode. We could do a Bush Point too, and I could talk about. I don't know if you guys have ever seen like the burn pits and everything.
Yeah, that's crazy. There are all sorts of documentaries about the burn pits back in the day. I think an underappreciated part of the Iraq War too is just with respect to how it benefited oil companies, is just the impact it had on world oil prices. And if you think about how fracking came about, the entire technique was premised on the idea that oil prices were at this new normal of high. And so to a certain extent, it almost seems like without the Iraq War, fracking, maybe it wouldn't have developed the way that it did, at least. That's pretty fucked up.
For sure, yeah.
But if you have to have relatively high, baseline high oil prices in order for fracking to work, because like Saudi Arabia can produce a barrel of oil at like, it's like fucking like $5 or $10 per barrel, but like your general oil in or fracked natural gas or something like that in America is like $60 per barrel.
Yeah.
So like they need the prices to remain really high. That's why like fucking OPEC is so powerful, because they can just artificially, and they did this in like the real run up from like 2011 to 2014. There was a drop in the demand for it, and then they just kept the production at level, and then that just tanked the price, and they held it as long as they could because they just wanted to put frackers out of business in America, because it was a true threat, because they're like, well, they're going to just set up their own domestic supply and instead of taking our market share from it.
Yeah, now they have a bunch of money to throw at bullshit like WeWork, which they're doing.
Yes, fuck, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to chime in with something here and just sort of announce to all of our listeners that I am a peak oil guy, and I'm not going to get into it in further detail right now. I was going to say that would be a different episode, but honestly, that's probably a whole other podcast. So maybe some point I'll be able to rant about peak oil, because the Saudis have already been investing in offshore drilling, which, as you pointed out, Dwight, those other forums, they take a lot of upfront costs. It's not nearly as cheap as just, the wells on the ground. And so if the Saudis are doing it, and theoretically they're the ones who are supposed to have the largest oil reserve in the world, which is only according to them, maybe that indicates that they know that they've already tapped out their thing, which maybe means that we're on the downturn of oil. And again, I'm not going to go any further than that. You can just speculate about what that might potentially means.
You got me excited, buddy. You got me pumped.
By the way, I'm sure the Saudi royal family is listening to Trump talking about just plundering Syrian oil and getting all sorts of ideas, a la, Saddam Hussein rolling into Kuwait. I mean, like, insofar as that's concerned, like, the Kuwaiti royal family is fucked too. So, like, whatever on that front.
I mean, I would like to see an abolishing of all royal families globally, personally.
Yeah, no, it's grim thinking about like openly fighting wars for resources. How soon is that going to be insanely in our face all the time?
Well, again, I have my own projections. I'll be releasing them at a later date in a staggered of leaks and graphs that I will post only, for the top tier Patreon payers, or whatever. If you want to know exactly when the oil crisis is going to come, how to protect your family, and other forms of, water preservation and things you can do at the home, you can buy my survival kit. I'll be plugging that later.
At the $10 Patreon level, we're going to be selling food buckets and survival seeds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
For those that are confused at us talking about a Patreon, there is one, but you just weren't invited. And it's part of an elite tier.
It's like Google Wave. Do you guys remember Google Wave?
Jesus Christ. Yes.
That just collapsed in on itself like an actual wave.
Wasn't it like, it was like Australian Brothers or something like that had started it, and then it was required by Google before it had even gotten released. And I remember seeing a video of them like pressing the button of the servers and being like, okay, it's on. That's it. Oh, hey, everybody clapped around the boardroom or whatever. And then I think it lasted like a month and a half or something like that and just got fucking destroyed.
What? Wait, what was this?
I'm not familiar with this either.
It was literally like a Ponzi scheme version of a social network. So the idea was Google was trying to create like a competitor to Facebook. This was like in the late 2000s, maybe early 2010s. I forget the exact date. And so the concept was, it was like a selective invite only thing. So you would get like invited into Google Wave, and then the idea is like you could send it out to like 10 people, and then they would send it out to 10 people. And of course,
it's like multi-level marketing.
Like after a week or two, nobody gave a shit, because the idea was like, once you're in the wave, like you'll get access to all the Google Wave content, and nobody was making any content because they were like, what is this? And the only people who were plugged into social media were using Facebook and Twitter and shit already. So it just immediately collapsed, and then they just never talked about it again. And then they replaced it with Google Plus, which I think we all have that now. I think they just give it to you when you're born. They just stamp it on your forehead and then ship you along.
Isn't it disturbing, by the way, how suddenly, like, LinkedIn is now a website where people post? Like, you go there and you see, like, your more careerist-minded friends from the past who are just, like, posting the most fucking insipid shit in the planet and be like...
Bottom tier posts.
Bottom tier posts.
Yes.
I've never been on LinkedIn, but now I want to go troll it.
Chris, please.
It's a rich vein, I feel, for like, veteran posters and shit posters. And it's actually like if you subscribe to the top tier of LinkedIn and you get access to everyone's stuff, it's actually like a pretty good investigative tool. So if you're, for example, a journalist and trying to dig around about a certain company, you suddenly have access to data about like who used to work there, because people list their resumes, and a lot of people won't have worked there, and maybe they can dish certain stuff, but also maybe certain people who also work there will dish certain stuff because people just fucking hate their bosses.
Hell yeah.
I have a little petty victory about LinkedIn. So I made an account, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, whenever it started, and I never looked at it after that. But I do continually receive invites from people from my past, like, we want to connect on LinkedIn. And there's one guy who many years ago got me fired from a job, and still, like, every few months, I'll get like a LinkedIn request with him with like a personalized message. And I just every time ignore it, and that's my way of big timing him now.
I mean, it's weird. Like, I absolutely abhor it, and I try not to look at it, for years at a time. But every time I do go on, it's always like boomers posting these shit memes about like, oh, you want free college? You should earn it. And it's just like a picture of like a stock footage of like a battlefield and like a soldier walking across it.
Well, this sounds like top tier, like trollable social media in the same way that Nextdoor is as well. Like Nextdoor, like the land of all of the just like psychotic, paranoid suburban boomers. I'd like to spend some more time on there as well. But no, I got to check out LinkedIn, man.
I think a good thing about LinkedIn is like you can fucking like tank like shitheads' careers if you go to their page and start posting like, hey man, it was cool that you showed up at like the PSL meeting or whatever, and like
I mean, Chris, to be clear, I've already written a note here to say, please follow up with Chris to make sure that he gets on LinkedIn.
I got to check it out, man. I got to get some success win memes in, man.
Well, dude, this is something I thought about this like 8 years ago or 10 years ago or something. I'm sorry I haven't thought about it since now, but I'm like, why don't I just create, just for fun, just create this like real sort of waspy fake resume, fake person on LinkedIn, and just have them go to like elite schools and shit, and just like stack it.
Well, you can just do that. Like you don't have to like verify everything.
Just get a fucking burner phone or something, like whatever. Like nobody, they're not gonna know, but like create its own thing, and I just want to know what it would be like if that was a thing where I could just like waltz in, like of course, Mr. fucking Font Weather, we'd love to have schedule an interview with you and the CEO, and then it started getting me thinking. I was just like, well, if that's possible, and like I'm convinced, I never did it, but like I'm convinced that it is, and if the whole fucking apparatus of work and employment and capitalism is fucking fake, and there's no meritocracy anyway, we should be, especially like millennials, especially the younger generation, should be lying on our fucking resumes at a rapid clip. And I'm dead serious about this.
You don't have to tell me twice, man. Yeah, my resume is half lies, man.
So yeah, it's really easy to just make up a lie, dude. Like the internet is pretty amazing.
Look, I've been a working man for a long time now, or it feels like a long time, and like I know so intimately how fucking bankrupt the system is and how fucking racist it is, and especially now. Oh my Jesus Christ! I saw that thing that was like, oh yeah, this new hiring tool is going to scan people's faces, and it will be like the first pass to see whether or not they're going to go on to like actually having their resume considered or whatever. And I'm like, the whole thing is fucking racist and classist and fucking.
I mean, that's a dystopia that like would have seemed outlandish in a 90s movie. You know what I mean? Like not even that long ago.
Yeah.
And then it's becoming a reality.
That's like a bad Matrix knockoff movie. You know?
Yeah.
Like Equilibrium. You guys ever see
Thinking,
Equilibrium?
Ballistic X versus Sever.
What's so annoying is that like the most basic meme now is like totally true, which is like 1984 was a book, not an instruction manual.
Yeah.
But actually,
yeah, no, the facial recognition thing is really concerning because I mean I think it's pretty obvious to people in our kind of political space now that like there are just so many biases. Even if they're unintentional, these biases that get worked into these coding infrastructures, right? And these companies who are always putting forth their product, similar like when we talked about Google, is this like objective, neutral thing, or like they talk about this algorithm as if it's this black boxed magic thing. It's like who knows how it works, but it's like infused heavily with this obviously like very racially and class based bias. And there was a really interesting example of this that I just saw recently, but apparently it went viral a little while ago. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but there was this racist soap dispenser. Have you guys seen this?
No. Please go on.
So it was this company developed this soap dispenser that was supposed to read using like a computer scanning technology and read whether or not it had a hand underneath it.
Right.
And so if you stick your hand underneath it, it's supposed to then dispense soap, and it's only supposed to dispense it if a hand is underneath it. And of course, what happened is a black guy goes up to put his hand under the soap dispenser, and it doesn't recognize that it's a hand. And so he keeps doing it, and at least in the context of this video, he's sort of laughing at it because it's so outlandishly kind of racist, right? But he's like putting his hand underneath it, it's not working. His white friend puts his hand underneath, the soap comes out, black guy tries again, and then the black guy can't get soap to come out of it until he puts a white napkin on his hand.
Wow.
And then sticks it underneath,
Jesus.
and then the soap comes out. And obviously that's like a particularly ridiculous kind of one, but you have to think about then the historical context that's in terms of like the segregation of bathrooms and like being able to like clean oneself, and how those things like then will end up becoming infused, even if they're not necessarily intentional, even if somebody didn't set out to create a segregating bathroom soap dispenser, nonetheless will carry through these, because I'm sure everybody who developed it was just like a white dude, and so they didn't even think to test outside of themselves. They just put their hand underneath it and was like, oh, see, it works. If it works for me, this like white rich guy from Silicon Valley, it must work for everybody.
Getting bathroom dispensers to do race science is really some late stage capitalism shit.
Has science gone too far?
They're developed for the bathrooms at Quillette.
But like, what the fuck problem are they trying to solve?
Right, exactly. Like the soap dispenser works fine. It works fine. It's okay.
But there already are ones, aren't there, that are automatic, right? Like you don't even. They work just fine.
Even the ones that aren't automatic, the little plastic containers. I have a plastic container of hand soap in my bathroom, and I have never once looked at it and thought, like, I wish it had smartphone capability.
I wish this hooked up to Wi-Fi.
Just push it.
They could receive occasional updates like the fucking Juicero.
Just took a big shit. Automatically posted Twitter and Facebook.
Tweeted from my racist soap dispenser.
It's actually fucking bleak. Like, if you think about the bottom of the barrel that, quote, innovation is trying to, like, is scraping, like, that this is what they're trying to solve. Like, this is the fucking hole in the market that you need a racist soap dispenser in, like, you know, fucking Met Stadium or something like that. Honestly, I was, like, just kind of silently thinking about this. If you were, like, a huge, large-scale organization, let's say you were, like, Walmart, there's a quantifiable loss of soap, like, if you look at it in a year, how much is actually lost.
Exactly, yeah.
Because how they typically work is just a light sensor. Any motion sensor is just literally a light sensor. So like the lights are on and the fluorescent lights, you put your hand underneath, it creates a shadow, it fucking dispenses the soap. But sometimes people walk past it and it will dispense. If they're installed incorrectly and it's too close to the faucet, then anytime you go to wash your hands in the faucet, soap just goes down the drain. So I'm sure that's what actually they were the thing that they were trying to solve, but instead they just fucking did Jim Crow but in the bathroom.
By the way, I just figured out the personality for your fake LinkedIn profile, Chris.
Okay.
You're gonna be like a traveling salesman for the racist soap dispenser, because you can't, like, no, they wouldn't take the units anymore. So now you've just got like a garage full of them.
Prospective clients asking you if the soap dispensers are compliant with federal law, and you just start tugging at your collar.
Yeah. I'm envisioning like a real like Jack Lemmon in Glengarry and Glen Ross kind of salesman.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I have those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight. Today we have with us Shane.
Howdy.
We've got Chris.
What's up?
Super honored to have with us from the District Sentinel. We've got Sam Knight.
Hey, it's an honor to be here. Love the pod.
Pleasure to have you. This one is a kind of an interesting show, and honestly, I feel like a bit sheepish going into it because it's just like looking at a fucking rat's nest. Like, you don't even know where to start and where it starts and ends. And it hasn't even ended. And honestly, frankly, I have like this weird kind of thought that something's gonna fucking change even before this goes to air.
Yeah, absolutely.
WeWork is what we're talking about today. The absolute, probably harbinger of the death of capitalism, to be honest. Which is...
one of the horsemen of the apocalypse.
We can't even mention the name without laughing.
So WeWork, the curious case of WeWork. Sam, I would love it if you gave us a little bit of a primer of the rough timeline of what's led us to this point.
WeWork was founded in 2010, which, as I'm sure you are aware, was not long after the U.S. economy started moving out of a recession. And this company was basically premised on insanely low interest rates and a surplus of commercial real estate, and also the idea that we are moving toward more of a independent contractor, sort of flexible, air quotes, flexible labor sort of economy where they can rent out a bunch of office space. So on the face of it, it seems like kind of it would make sense as a business model. And I'll jump ahead to the end, and I guess we'll go back and sort of fill out the story a bit. But so they were going to float their stock. They were going to go public, the old IPO. To do that, of course, you have to file certain documents with the SEC, and these documents that they filed just sort of showed that the company was kind of a fucking mess.
To put it lightly.
And so everyone was sort of spooked off the company. The IPO was canceled. The CEO, Adam Neumann, is leaving. He's getting a huge exit package. I'm sure we'll be talking about that for fucking 45 minutes alone.
Absolutely.
The company is laying off thousands of people, and it's all gone to shit.
So why don't we start to talk about some of the characters in this thing, because it is fucking bizarre. We should probably talk about the king himself. We should start off with Adam.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Adam he's an interesting character, and I feel like any sort of these modern stories of huge economic failure, it's useful to go back and look at how whatever dipshit who was trying to siphon off as much money as possible, like what their whole background is and how they like gain these people's the confidence and, you know, their whole worldview. So he was not born into great privilege per se, as far as I can tell. He moved around a lot as a kid. His parents were divorced. He was dyslexic. He was one of these places he lived was a kibbutz in Israel, which probably informed his views on extremely branded communal space. if you catch my drift, you know, kibbutz obviously is branded as this pinnacle of communal living and whatever, but it's kind of hard to actually do that in a militarized apartheid state.
My understanding of the guy was that he did come from some, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought he did come from some degree of privilege. I understand both of his parents were doctors.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, like, just based on him, you know, the story is he lived in like 15 different places as a kid.
Exactly.
And, you know, usually when you do that, it's not exactly the hallmark of I was from the upper echelons if I had to move 15 times. But I think where it really comes in and where his entree into this high society of dipshits really comes is through his wife, who is related to Gwyneth Paltrow. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say he was like a Horatio Alger, whatever, pull himself up as bootstraps. No, of course not. That's all bullshit. He married into if not enormous wealth, at least a network that enabled him to tap into the enormous wealth. So I think his wife is also a good place to bring us back to the IPO, because the IPO showed that she had a lot of influence over the company. And it subsequently came out, the Wall Street Journal reported that like she would fire people within minutes of meeting them because she didn't,
strictly based on their vibes or whatever. Yeah, even people who just been hired.
Yeah, vibes.
Vibe check.
Well, also, real quick on the topic of Rebecca Newman's outsized influence in the country. Also, she had the sole ability, I don't know if you saw this, in the event of Adam Newman's death or incapacitation or whatever, she was the sole person who would name his successor of the company.
That's right. That was Rebecca Newman was definitely...
I did not know that. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, she had that power, and I think that spooked a lot of people and got people to ask some questions.
Is there more stuff that we can talk about with Rebecca's background and stuff? You want to talk about Miguel as well?
Yeah, I can talk to Miguel McKelvey real quick and sort of, you know, the way in which he and Adam Newman met and sort of founded the company. So when Adam Newman moved from Israel to the United States, he moved to New York, and he was actually living with his sister, who was a model in New York City, who had actually been Miss Teen Israel. And so he was living in New York, and he started these, you know, various sort of bizarre entrepreneurial endeavors. The first one he tried was making a women's shoe that could like convert between heels and flats, like a collapsible heel shoe. Like that was
like the roller skating shoes.
So that's Adam Newman's first big idea. So he tries that, and then he creates a children's clothing company called Crawlers. The main idea of this being that the pants They have built-in knee pads.
We're dealing with genius here.
Like that's the big idea. So he's trying to get this company Crawlers off the ground, and then so that's when he's at this party in New York City, and that's when he meets Miguel McKelvey. Miguel McKelvey was.
I'm sorry. Wait, hold on a second.
yeah.
Crawlers is like one of those. Like after Gremlins was a big hit, there was like a whole slew of like knockoff franchises, like the Ghoulies and
Yes.
Critters.
Yeah.
One of them is Crawlers.
Oh, really? That's a real one.
No, I'm just saying.
Okay, I see. Yeah. So he's trying to get this company off the ground. So then he meets. He's at this party in New York City, and that's when he meets Miguel McKelvey. Miguel McKelvey. He was born in Oregon. He actually, interestingly, he also was raised in this sort of weird communal community. He was literally, basically raised on like a hippie commune in Oregon. It was like 10 people. It was his mother, and then like 4 other single mothers, and then the children. So like that was the background he comes from as well. So they got that in common, and they meet at this party, and that's where they sort of come up with the idea of what would become WeWork. Originally they called it, I believe, Green Desk. That was the original company that they started together with the idea of buying up leases and then like subletting them out.
If maybe I can also just interject here, totally for the sake of our audience, and not at all for me, because I'm 100% clear on exactly how WeWork works. But if just to explicate it a little bit for our audience, so they buy out like foreclosed office spaces, and then they give you like a membership.
Well, that comes later. So really what the original they're not actually buying any property at first. What they're doing is they're getting these long-term, like 10, 15, 20-year leases for office buildings from these landlords, and then they are leasing out either individual offices or sometimes even individual desks to like small startups, or like even like one freelance person like on short-term basis, and like for a jacked up price. That's the whole model.
I feel like I should interject here and say that some of this involved renting properties from Adam Newman himself.
Absolutely.
There you go.
I don't want to necessarily get too far ahead of ourselves here, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I could see something like a WeWork existing, something like that maybe working. Like the very basics of the business model doesn't seem like too outlandish, but it was just such a vehicle for Adam Newman.
Naked self-dealing and corruption.
Yeah. I know these are some tangential characters, but I would be remiss if I kind of let this go to tell you about Miguel McKelvey's sister is a this is Miguel McKelvey's wife.
Okay.
Is named Chaim McKelvey, and there's not much I found on her, but this was from an AM New York article that says Chaim McKelvey is all puckered up.
That's the headline. That's it.
There's no article. It just says that.
Yeah.
She opened like 3 makeup counters called Pucker. Is what she called them. But guess where she worked for 11 years? Lehman Brothers.
Nice.
Okay.
Perfect.
I see.
Yeah. Very interesting.
I mean, that's not to say that any one of these people, is the sum of everything, but you start to see how they plug in to this network. It all makes increasing amounts of sense. I guess I should say that, I was looking back on some of the reporting about WeWork from like 2017 to just sort of see like, how was it straight reported? Like, how is it that this company sort of became such a laughing stock? There's so many people who are culpable here. But one of the interesting things, and I guess maybe this has just looked like with the benefit of hindsight, but this is from a Reuters article, 2017. 2 years ago, less than 1% of WeWork's business was generated by Fortune 500 type companies, but that figure is now about 30% and growing, Newman said, interpreting that as a sign of a viable business model. If you, as a landlord, I don't think it makes sense. You shouldn't see long-term profits in people who have a bunch of fucking legal teams and are fucking sharks, quite frankly. He sort of saw this probably as we've got corporate money, we've got institutional money that that probably looks good. And I'm sure on the other end, all those companies were thinking, we're just going to try to rinse this dickbag at his stupid little fucking WeWork company and his cucumber water for all it's worth. Like, I don't know. I mean, it does sort of seem like that may have been a little red flag. Another red flag was this is again from 2017. They wanted to basically do adult dormitories. They had a concept called We Live.
Yeah.
Oh.
We Live. Reuters again. The company has launched in New York City and Crystal City, Virginia, which of course is a suburb of DC, right by the Pentagon. It's where Bezos is going to build his HQ too.
I really want to talk about that for a second. The We Live thing. So I just watched this just quick little Vice bit on from 2016 on We Live. It's firstly, I need to tell everybody that my soul has left my body watching it. I don't even know what to say about it. Basically, it follows around this. It follows this 25-year-old kid who, like all former Goldman Sachs bankers, which he looks like a 48-year-old from Hyannisport, Cape Cod. It follows him around from his life working in a WeWork space and then to working in a We Live dormitory in Lower Manhattan. And he is, in the video at the time, he was the vice president of a startup called Zero Sum, which was a social no, it's worse than you think. It's worse than you think. It's a social networking site for hedge fund employees.
That's where we really need to be trolling, man.
I know. So he said, so you have Sunday night family dinner at We Live and Monday morning breakfast at WeWork. The interviewer asks,
does your real family understand your We Live family?
Not really.
And then they tour his one-bedroom deluxe suite. His one-bedroom deluxe, that's what he pays for, which goes for $4,875 per month. Yes. And then he starts talking about how important it is that I'd much rather have somebody all the furniture comes with the unit, and he's like,
oh, what a steal! Exactly. What a fucking steal! He would be losing money not to rent the unit.
Think of all the time he saves not assembling IKEA furniture. His 3 hours of labor, which are worth
time is money, and we are work.
Listen, I'll tell you exactly what he does in his free time, because she says in the narrative from the interviewer, she says living in We Live gives him the time to focus on the things he cares about, such as reading Ayn Rand.
No. You're making that up.
I promise. I promise. Yeah, We Live is a fucking joke. And he's like, and this is called the Honesty Store, and you can go here. Nobody ever steals from it. It's really cool. It's just fucking, some Suave shampoos and Q-tips and shit, just sitting there. And it's a fucking canteen. It's a commune.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's a fucking commune.
The dystopian future is already here, man.
Yes.
How is We Live not the title to the sequel for They Live? This is just it's so awful. I mean, this was the parody moment in fucking Sorry to Bother You.
Yes.
Right? Where they literally had the dormitory workspace, and that was the point in the movie for me. I was like, okay, now we've gone past a kind of generic parody to some really unrealistic satire, which I was fine with in the context of that film, which is a fantastic film for if anybody who hasn't seen it. But the fact that this actually exists, and it's not even a company town where your wages are garnished to live in the dorm. He's paying $5,000. You could literally just take out a shitload of new student loans and just go back to college and spend less per month and just not work.
The craziest thing about it is imagine if he had found a reasonable priced place to live. He could just order pizza every night and order Seamless every night. Yes. Rather than just getting the shitty We Live dorm food.
Horrible.
It sounds like it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, is all I'm saying. If that guy is spending his time at We Live, reading Atlas Shrugged over and over again, I hope they were using some cheap as shit plastic that gave him, I think he deserves healthcare, but also maybe he should.
Well, it's
suffer.
interesting because the We Live dormitories were actually directly connected to the crematoriums, which were called We Die, and there was just a fucking conveyor belt that went from one to the other. other when you passed out from inhaling all the fucking asbestos or whatever that went into these paper mache houses.
Isn't it kind of funny, though, that this is just like so it's reported so straightly by Reuters that, like, they quote him, they say, "We Live is going to be a tremendous success." And, like, they don't bring in someone perhaps to say, like, analysts say this is actually just an adult dorm and is kind of weird and probably won't work. It's a similar problem as to what happened in 2008 or in the build up to that, and just that, like, there's no money for journalism and there aren't people who are, like, you know, skeptically covering business enough perhaps. And I don't know, it's probably more of the insane oil money and shit that's funding this sort of dumb shit.
And what's interesting about that to me is if you look, like you said, if you look back at these articles about WeWork from just a few years ago, they cover it completely uncritically, you know what I mean, even as absurd, you know, and ludicrous as all this stuff is. But then, like, at some point the switch flipped, because if you look at the coverage, like, even from generally, like, sympathetic to, like, the ruling class and, like, sympathetic business press like Forbes and, you know, Wall Street Journal and all these, you know, Business Insider and all these publications, like, they're like, now all the coverage is like, okay, yeah, this is a fucking scam, you know what I mean? Like, it's at some point that flip switched over the past couple of years, or this year, I guess, in the lead up to the IPO. And, like, that's what's so stunning about the coverage is that, like, they're not even, like, attempting really sometimes to protect their own. They're not even really attempting to protect Adam Neumann at this point. They're basically nakedly saying, like, yeah, this is a big Ponzi scheme, basically. This is a scam.
But it had to fail in order for them to get to that point.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is it's so obvious that the writing was on the wall that it was going to fail.
I'm gonna repeat exactly what I said in last week's episode. It just goes to show you how fucking gormless the corporate media is.
Right.
That they just don't even investigate it. Like when fucking Pat Robertson's like, yeah, I leg press 2,300 pounds. It's like, what the fuck? And they're like, all right, send that out. Send it to press. Maybe this is a good opportunity. I just want to say something about an interview with the SoftBank CEO, with Masayoshis Son.
Oh, yeah, hell yeah.
And I was just, again, this is where I'm just like sitting here like watching a YouTube clip and just jabbing a tack into my thigh to stop myself from screaming. Yeah, it was an interview this year in 2019 with the CEO of SoftBank named Masayoshis Son, who was a majority investor in WeWork. And back in March, the confidence that he speaks about with like the win-winningness of this company is fucking, like, now, like, in retrospect, is fucking hilarious. And keep in mind too that SoftBank is the same company that owns Sprint, that is currently pushing for a merger with T-Mobile because that's their big fucking cash out, right? And I've been posting about this a lot, how there's like a fucking corporate media, a corporate propaganda campaign that's trying to push attorneys general to like to have a domino effect. Thank you. To approve it for because it's at the DOJ. But anyway, and of course the company has huge investments all across America. But he goes on to explain that if you are looking at this, if you were a CEO or a CFO of a company and you were looking to lower your expenses, then WeWork is a good idea because on average it can save 40% on office space, right? If you have like this communal office space. And then he goes on to say that employees are on average 30% happier in WeWork locations than traditional office spaces.
How do you gauge that?
I know. I was just gonna say it's a made up fucking figure. It's made
Absolute
up.
bullshit.
Absolute horse shit.
I walked through the We Live space with a Geiger counter and determined that, you know, the denizens of my fucking, you know, office concentration camp sleep center are actually on the whole quite happy with the sawdust in the soap.
The interviewer, like, this is like the extent of the investigation of the corporate media interviewer, and he goes,
but right now they're losing money.
Oh, accounting-wise.
like, what the fuck?
There's no other way to measure money since the dawn of man. That has been the only way. It's the only derivation.
Is it like the first human writing was like in cuneiform, found in like Babylon and in Sumerian. It was like an accounting thing from like one
yes.
like a cooper to a customer about like
literally.
How much, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Well, I think to a lot of these people that invested in this, like these venture capitalists, like I guess the idea was that, same as if you were like investing in like a utility company or like a power company or something like that. Like you're putting in like this upfront infrastructure, you know what I mean? Like you have to buy up the office, space first. And I guess like their idea was that this model is like, it's going to be a big upfront cost, but eventually, down the road, this is going to turn a profit. But I mean, in principle, I guess that would seem to make sense. But if you didn't have Adam Newman, plundering the coffers the entire time.
I mean, it's in the same vein as all the other like share economy apps that have come about in the last 10 to 15 years. Which
Uber also had a disastrous IPO, not as bad as this one.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But they all are losing money. But the thing is, they're all premised on this one theoretical concept, which is like the wealth of networks, right? Which is the idea that once you have enough people within the network, like the value becomes like exponential after a certain point. So like there's this whole startup period where it's not going to make money, right? And this is all premised on like social media nonsense, because a few of those companies blew up and became the massive giants that we live with today. But like they only really work in theory if you're aiming for a monopoly, which is like what fucking Uber is doing, which is like its own kind of category of economic malfeasance. But on the other hand, like there is no network with WeWork. There's no network with WeWork. There's no network. There's nothing to network.
Well, I think it's becoming same as with Uber becoming a monopoly. It's sort of like maybe what they were aiming for is becoming too big to fail. You know what I'm saying? Like if you own, like I believe that at one point, maybe now, WeWork was like correct me if I'm wrong, the largest lessee of corporate office space in New York City. You know what I'm saying? And they got these 15, 20-year loans on these properties, or for these 15, 20-year leases on these properties. I mean, if you're that big and you have that much, like if you run out of money, you know what I'm saying? Like what happens to you? Like, does the government bail you out? Like if you have such a monopoly and then like you run out of money and like nobody's renting, like are you going to default on these leases? Like what's going to happen? Yeah,
we're going to find out in like 2 weeks.
What a lesson to take from the recession, to look at that and be like, that's a model.
I guess it sort of makes sense in like some respect if you think like maybe if you bet on one long shot, maybe it'll become the next Facebook or Google or whatever.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
But SoftBank also is throwing up some other airballs. I'm just gonna read from a TechCrunch piece on some of their duds. I don't know if I can do any better than just like sort of reading the facts of this. But so they invested in something called Fair.com, a startup of building a flexible car ownership business. It was valued at $1.2 billion, which evidently it said they're having to lay off 40% of its staff. They got $500 million from SoftBank. So I guess like half of its $1.2 billion in valuation roughly came from like, I don't know if SoftBank's investment. There was another one, a dog walking startup called WAG, which raised $300 million from SoftBank.
Why does that need $300 million?
There's not even like $300 million worth of dogs in the United States.
There's also Compass, which is basically like exactly like WeWork. And
that's called hedging.
If you listen to the podcast, I don't know why anyone would ever listen to another podcast, but if you do listen to Trash Future, they just did a whole episode on Compass and how it's basically just like WeWork, right down to its massive ties from SoftBank, the massive cash from SoftBank.
I think it's worth noting as well, like where the money that SoftBank is using to invest in these startups, it's from something, it's like $100 billion fund that they've set aside called the SoftBank Vision Fund. The largest chunk of money, $45 billion towards that $100 billion, comes from Mohammed bin Salman.
There you go. There you go.
Fucking shit.
Oh, yeah,
Get
baby.
the fuck out of here.
With the additional, the second biggest is $15 billion as well from the United Arab Emirates Sovereign Wealth Fund. Like the rest of it is like $1 billion here from Apple, like $1 billion, a couple billion, I think, from Foxconn as well, the Taiwanese company that builds the iPhone that's famous for their the nets outside of their buildings to keep their workers from committing suicide. Yeah. So that's where all this money is coming from.
What you're describing, though, and I don't know if this is fair to draw this parallel here, but like all I'm seeing is in those $100 billion coming from these petrocracies is just that's just climate change right there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like those dollars were taken from a petrocracy that is just polluting the air based off of fossil fuels, and that's just where the climate change goes. So if you want to know who's going to bear the cost of climate change, is us, like the working class, via our taxes, who's going to have to like fucking stock up on like, I don't know, just making like underground layers or some shit. And then who benefits from this is just this shit, Adam Newman.
Mohammed bin Salman.
Yeah, they're the ones who are benefiting from this.
Yeah, like, to what extent do you think, like, some of this, and obviously the answer is a lot, but, like, a guy like Mohammed bin Salman is for him to, like, you know, when he meets American politicians, I'm sure he loves to bring this shit up, like, just slyly.
of course.
Like, be, oh, yeah, WeWork. Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, Adam Newman.
It
Yeah,
plays.
he's a great guy. And it's so... Ugh. People in the financial press are calling it dumb money, and I think that's a pretty apt description. But as we were saying earlier, also the joke's on them for just sort of fucking just sticking their own thumb up their asses while this goes on under their watch yet again for the second time in another decade.
Again. And it's not like it was 1929. It's within the same generation of people that are doing that job. It happened in their careers fucking 10 years ago.
Since you said generation, there is one another little detail I'd like to introduce into this. So one of the ways that I kind of personally encountered WeWork previously, you know, having grown up and lived most of my life in New York, I have seen their subway ads. I don't know if you guys have ever seen.
Creepy.
I hate it so much.
Their subway ads. They remind me quite a bit of Fiverr, which is another service I'd love to do an episode on someday.
So much.
People have seen those subway ads.
Yes.
It's just this hyper aggressive entrepreneurial success win stuff that's usually done in this weirdly minimalist style where there'll just be like some, you know, kind of randomly algorithmically generated like hipster person will be like glaring at you, and then there'll be like a little bit of text that says like fuck coffee, live work, or whatever.
For those who have breakfast at 9 p.m.
But so I just happened to I was trying to find some in the course of talking about this episode, and I came across one that I hadn't seen. So apparently all of these are branded with their hashtag, which is hashtag Workspace Thoughts. And I do recommend you click on that hashtag
Don't do this to me, man.
and see just how many people shared their own Workspace Thoughts with WeWork. But there's this great one here, and I'm just going to read it out because I know it's going to just piss off everybody. So this is on one of the pillars in the New York City Metro. It's just like, it's an all black billboard thing, and it says in white text, "When baby boomers and millennials collaborate, does Gen Z become Gen We?"
Oh,
Fuck.
hell yes.
Fuck! Fuck!
I love it, man.
The funny thing about SoftBank is because as Chris was saying, like, part of the whole goal of this is to end up with monopoly power. But another funny thing about SoftBank is there's evidence that once they get said monopoly power, they actually, like, they did worse.
Yep.
And like, so they acquired Sprint in like 2013, and the company has done substantially worse since it was acquired by SoftBank, to the point where it's getting taken over by, they're trying to get it taken over by T-Mobile, and lawyers for Sprint are like telling the FCC that the company's financial situation is bad, and that, like, basically so bad that you have to approve of this merger proposal. I mean, I don't know to what extent they're just trying to, like, scare regulators into accepting the deal, but I feel like that's not something you want to be taught, like, admitting as a company in court filings, is that, or it's not court filing, it was just a letter, but it says Sprint is in a very difficult situation that is only getting worse, is what they said in a letter to the FCC.
In that vein too, if you want to talk about executives failing up, the CEO of Sprint, before the merger was announced, it was a guy named Marcelo Clore, and he just oversaw just the demise of Sprint. He is now, guess who he works for?
WeWork?
He's chief executive officer of SoftBank Group International.
Yes!
Funny thing, that.
And nobody, I guarantee you, nobody has ever thought about this, but it's burned in my mind. I'll play it right now if I can find it. But there was an ad for, it was like a focus group with Marcelo Clore, the CEO, with like Sprint users, and this was like an ad, and they were talking about. So what do you guys think about when when I say the word T-Mobile? And one woman, and this went to air, and one woman said ghetto. And he's nodding along.
Jesus.
He's nodding along. Like, yeah.
I'm going to tell you a carrier name, and I want you to basically tell me what comes to your mind. T-Mobile. When I say T-Mobile to you, just a couple of words.
Oh my God, the first word that came to my head was ghetto.
Yeah.
That sounds like terrible. Oh my God, I don't know. Like, I just felt like there's always like 3 carriers. It's AT&T, Sprint, and Verizon. And people who have T-Mobile are just like, why do you have T-Mobile? I don't know.
And they fucking published that.
So I guess here's maybe the question I have about SoftBank, because, as a result of this, this WeWork's failed IPO, SoftBank has now, Adam Neumann is forced to step down, and SoftBank has essentially acquired, this company. Was this their angle all along? Like, was Masayoshis Son, like encouraging maybe Adam Neumann, some of his worst instincts, and like maybe, encouraging him to tank this company so that they could essentially acquire it? Because worst case scenario, like, they now, have these long-term leases to all these, if nothing else, they've got all of this office space. You know what I'm saying? Like they've made off, like Adam Neumann's made off like a bandit, but I mean, they have as well.
I mean, that's certainly a theory. I think that also they have suffered substantial reputational risk in the near to medium term, but they have taken it, like, they sunk like fucking like $10 million into WeWork, and that has practical implications as well for, like, how regulators look at their cash reserves and shit like that, and how they operate and their loan to value rate, all that crap. But when we're talking about real estate, obviously you're thinking of like in the decades more than few quarters or whatever. So it's possible that one of the reasons they felt like they could, worst case scenario, we just end up with some primo fucking real estate, maybe.
Sure. Free real estate, baby.
And if you've ever been to a WeWork office, like, it had been redone by Adam Neumann and his crew. So
I've got, I don't know if you guys encountered this story, but just one quick personal anecdote about Masayoshis Son to sort of shade him as a character a little bit. Did you guys read the story about him threatening to set himself on fire?
no.
At a WeWork
No,
place,
okay,
or what?
so Masayoshis Son, so he, like all throughout the 90s, like the late 90s, he's investing in all of these, a lot of the startups of the, the last .com crash, bubble and crash. And so, like, for a brief period of time in the late 90s, he likes to claim he was, the richest man in the world for a brief period of time, even ahead of Bill Gates. And then, the bubble bursts and he loses, like, literally, personally, he loses $70 billion. Or SoftBank does. And so what he decides is that the reason all these tech companies that he's investing in, the reason he lost all this money, the reason they failed, is because at least in Japan, people don't have access yet to the broadband internet, high-speed internet to make these things work. So nobody's getting in on these because nobody's got the internet to make it work. So he makes it his mission then to get broadband, like, put into every house in Japan or whatever. So he goes down to, like, the power company, the telephone company or whatever, and he walks into the office and he literally he pulls out a lighter and he threatens to set himself on fire if they don't acquiesce to his demands. I believe he owned, correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't Sprint, it was another telephone company, the division of the Japanese division of a major cell phone company he owned at the time, and he went in there and threatened to set himself on fire. So that,
unbelievable.
The point of this is the kind of psychotic personality we're dealing with here with Masayoshis Son.
I'm just imagining, like, he doesn't even do it in a boardroom. It's like the king of comedy. Like, he just keeps bothering the receptionist to install high speed internet everywhere, and then threatens to set himself on fire. That was a good reference. I'm giving myself points.
I don't want to move off SoftBank, but I think we would be remiss too if we didn't note that there were numerous American banks who had their thumbs in this pie.
Absolutely.
And it sort of, so they were helping Newman and WeWork prepare for its IPO, and some of the ideas of how this company was worth, WeWork had said it was worth $47 billion, and everyone just sort of laughed. Like, you're losing like, $1.8 billion on like $1.7 billion in revenue. Like, that's not good. That's not good. And so it comes out that, obviously all these American banks, Goldman, JP Morgan, there were a lot of ties between JP Morgan and Newman personally, but they were getting these ideas in his head that Goldman was saying it was worth like $65 billion. And it sort of reminded me of, like, in the subprime crisis, you had all these ratings agencies that were giving bunk ratings to the mortgage-backed securities, and the reason they were doing it is because, well, they were clients, and if they didn't tell them what they wanted to hear, they would lose some business. And I guess we sort of see that same incentive structure at play here.
And something I was thinking about in this whole saga is that I don't want to divorce this from startup culture, because like we're talking a lot about banking, but like this is very much banking loves to salivate over like startup culture and stuff.
Sure. And that's what WeWork essentially is basically a real estate company attempting to brand itself in this sort of Silicon Valley tech startup, veneer.
Exactly that.
Yeah. The word technology is like used over and over again in its filings with the SEC, and it's a fucking real estate company.
It's not.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's why I wanted to clarify exactly what it is they do, because I've mostly encountered it just through its branding, and like it's totally indecipherable until you realize it's just like a middleman leasing company.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not like some fucking. It's not even a new idea. That's literally just the concept of real estate.
Yeah,
that's it.
But that's the thing. Like with any of these like kind of startup companies now, it's just all branding. Like something that fucking kills me is Away Luggage. Have you guys seen that?
Oh, don't tell me there's a technology luggage company. I can't. I can't have that many years shaved off my life tonight.
It's a fucking suitcase. Like it's a completely existing business model, but it's a fucking suitcase. But it leverages cheap money. It leverages cheap Eastern labor and just like really good graphic design. It's a complete shtick.
Wait, is it a share program for your suitcase?
No, it's fucking. But it's got
Isn't that like against fucking TSA regulations?
Yes, sir. Somebody told me to travel with this on the aircraft. I did not pack this myself. But it does have a battery I can plug into USB, so I consider it a win. But going back to like the startup culture, I think what's really fucked about it is that they view failure as some sort of currency.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Sure. It's a success fail.
Like it's just something that we all accept that like, and maybe it's because we're like propagandized by capital to make us think that it's normal. But like we always hear from startup culture all the time that like failure is a good thing, and failure is how you learn, and failure tests how resilient you are.
I wish I could tell that to I wish you could tell that to your landlord. Like, you're looking at this as the wrong way. I'm failing to pay the rent is actually an incredible opportunity for both of us to learn here.
It worked great for WeWork.
Yeah, it's just used as like an easy justification for when overvalued companies implode, like we're watching right now. It's like, well, yeah, you learn and you move on, but you're just absolving the apparatus and yourself that allows for these fucking corporate fuck-ups. And obviously, who pays the price in all this is labor.
Yes.
I just want to interject again, since we're sort of talking about it here. There's another poster from WeWork that I really just want to read, because I think it speaks again to this weird startup entrepreneurial branding and language, and it's just like absolutely horrific, at least to me. In big text, it says, "This is not an office," which very clearly it is. It's an office company.
So fucking stupid.
But and then in between the text is like, a little bit extra. And so it says, "It's the fucking Coliseum. We do battle here, wrestle with unruly clients, vanquish unreasonable expectations, kill half-baked ideas, and we emerge victorious to stand atop a table with our laptop held high.
Oh, God.
Keyboard stained with the blood of 1,000 paper cuts.
Oh, my
This
God.
is not an office. this is where we work. I'm pretty sure most of that is cribbed from like a Heinz Guderian speech before like the fucking invasion of France in 1940. This is like insane. First of all, it is an office. Let's just get like epistemologically correct. It is an office. Like it is nothing but an office. But it's this whole like, you know, it's this attempt to rebrand this highly fragmented form of precarious contracted labor into this like challenging gauntlet. And that for me, again, as you know, as a laborer, and countering this branding is always what I find so offensive about this, is because it's a way to frame, like, instead of thinking your job sucks, why don't you, you know, make your job work for you by fucking it? It's just like this insane language that tries to, you know, imbue people who, and, you know, at least, again, insofar as part of the marketing is involved, I'm not talking here about, like, the companies that would lease, you know, whatever, WeWork space. I'm talking, again, about these guys who are trying to do startup things, or a lot of, like, freelance people and stuff who use this, right? It's a way to, like, reframe your, like, precarious labor situation as this kind of you know, great adventure of, I don't know, ambition and connectivity, and you're gonna meet all these other like-minded, you know, fast-moving people in this like fucking open-ended office space, which you're paying to be in. It's totally fucked up and backwards, and it totally reframes the entire basic premise of like the capital labor relationship.
And when they weren't branding you as some sort of like, you know, like fucking economic gladiator or lone wolf or whatever, they were imbued in the Rebecca Newman language of fake energy bullshit and like the Kabbalah crap like was all over their IPO and shit. And maybe not the IPO itself, but how they were branding themselves. They were like, oh, we're elevating the world's consciousness.
Oh, it's a complete cult of personality that the two of them developed around themselves.
Total
like
bullshit.
Sort of permeated. They attempted to imbue on the whole, you know, workplace culture.
And Newman himself had like this special class of shares, which basically enabled him personally
Yes.
to have majority control over this company, which maybe would be a good time to pivot into some of the extravagance. And,
right, exactly.
You know, maybe we could talk a little bit more about his personal ties with like J.P. Morgan.
Please.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just real quick to clarify, I think we might have touched on this in the Google episode, but that sort of that like two-tiered stock model was kind of pioneered by the guys at Google. They had two-tiered stocks for like one tier for, you know, your regular investors, and another tier for Larry Page and Sergey Brin, as well as some of the other, you know, top executives and stuff that were weighed. I can't remember if it was times 5 votes or times 10 votes or something like that. That would essentially ensure that Page and Brin always had, you know, control over the company. But however, you know, WeWork takes that to a whole nother level, in that there's two-tiered shares, one tier for literally everybody else, and then Adam Newman shares that are worth 20, which times 20 votes of every other share, that essentially gives him, you know, no matter what, complete control over the company.
It's like when you're a kid and you're like you're with your friends and you're like starting some club, and you keep doing like the more ridiculous titles, like I call president, I call king, I call dictator for life, you know. He gets the extra Newman shit, and like, wow, what he did with that. Like, so one of the things he did evidently was he trademarked the word "we" and had the company pay him $6 million for it.
Oh, come on!
Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. So yeah, it was him personally. It wasn't the company that trademarked it. It was he personally owned the trademark, and then he personally, you know, licensed it to the company at a profit for himself.
$6 million. I would. I can't imagine what I would do with that sort of money.
I'll jump in. This is not a great contribution, but I'm just looking at the guy right now, and I gotta say, he looks like a cross between Tommy Wiseau and Neil Breen.
Yes, absolutely.
He does.
That's really good.
Like, he just has this bizarre space cadet, dead, glassy-eyed look with the long, scraggly hair.
He looks like a cult leader.
Yeah, exactly. He looks like the cult leader from Mandy.
Guys, I don't know if you saw this, but I literally got a fucking alert on my phone and I just Googled it. A story just came out and it says, ex-WeWork CEO accused of gender discrimination and smoking pot in front of his pregnant staffer. I shit you not.
There was some sort of story I encountered about
smoking pot on his plane.
Oh yeah, on the plane. Yeah.
On the well, not his plane, but
yeah.
I mean, I guess it was his person. I don't know if it was the company jet,
right.
But he only used it. But he had this jet and he loved to smoke pot, and
right.
I think it got him into some trouble when he was traveling to Israel and just like chiefing the entire time. Which, like, fair play. I mean, I guess that sounds. If I were a rich guy yeah. with a private jet, I would totally use that, like, to smoke weed on long distance flights. So I think that's, like, you know, I gotta at least respect him for that.
Listen to this. It says the suit alleges Newman asked the former employee about her plans to get pregnant during a 2013 job interview and repeatedly called her maternity leave a vacation.
Wow.
Oh, that's fucked up.
Fuck.
So I just real quick, I have actually got a couple lines here from an article that I saw from back in June about a couple gender discrimination, sexual harassment, like age discrimination type lawsuits that are ongoing against the company. And here's quoting from this article here. It says, on Thursday, former WeWork senior vice president and head of compensation Lisa Bridges filed a complaint in a New York state court that the companies pay significantly and unfairly favored men. Bridges alleges that when she raised the issue internally, WeWork put her on leave and then fired her. Her litigation comes just weeks after former WeWork vice president of construction, Richard Merkel, age 62, filed an age discrimination lawsuit in San Francisco Superior Court on June 10th. In his complaint, Merkel alleged that he was unfairly fired and replaced by a younger man just a year after taking the job. And last October, former director of culture, Ruby Anaya, filed a sexual harassment and gender discrimination lawsuit against WeWork in the Manhattan Supreme Court.
So none of this is surprising, because a lot of the stories that were coming out as this thing was falling apart is just like what fucking like frat house kind of vibe it was. Like,
yeah, right,
there was a lot of...
He's a douche.
He's like a party douche. He's like, I guess, like a Tel Aviv DJ fucking dickhead type.
Well, there's several personal anecdotes I saw about how, you know, like his one of his main things is like when he's drunk at parties, he likes to take his shirt off. He likes to just like hang out.
Very cool.
With those shirt off.
I mean, there are evidently tequila shots at meetings, and so like it really does not surprise you to hear that there is A, age discrimination, and B, sex discrimination, and also on the latter front, there was Business Insider reported that there was a wild summer retreat during which employees, quote, could hear people audibly having sex in their tents all day and night.
Oh no.
Well, speaking of the tequila shots, real quick, there's one other anecdote that y'all have probably heard from 2016. I believe WeWork, they just laid off 7% of their workforce, and you know Adam Newman calls this sort of all hands on deck meeting at their corporate headquarters or whatever, and he gives this little talk about, you know, how hard it is that they had to lay off all these workers, and you know, but how it's going to be for the benefit of the company and onward and upward and all this sort of stuff. And then, you know, he finishes his little talk, and then like waitresses come out with trays full of tequila shots, and fucking DMC from Run DMC comes out and like does a set. Does like immediately after this speech about laying off, you know, nearly 10% of the workforce, you know, they're immediately back to, you know, tequila shots and treated to a Run DMC show.
Despicable, absolutely fucking despicable.
I can't even. What the fuck?
And so in terms of what he was doing with the properties too, he had 4 of them that he was leasing to the company, and they paid him $20.9 million.
Well, you know, in his justification for that too, right, was that like, well, you know, look, we're trying to, you know, in order to grow the business, we're trying to get these 20-year loans through these landlords, and the landlords are being like, well, you know, you're a venture capital based startup. Who the fuck are you? How do we know you're even going to be around in 5 years? So his justification was, you know, he had to buy out the property himself, you know, to, you know, in order to grow the company. But I mean, that all fucking is bullshit and falls apart, because why, like, if that was the case, why would WeWork the company not just buy the property? Like, why is it Adam Newman himself personally who's buying the property and then leasing it to WeWork, you know, and essentially using it, you know, as his personal piggy bank, you know, and profiting off of it personally.
And conveniently, the company still owed him like $230 million, which I think think some of that may have gone into his ridiculous $1.7 billion compensation package, which we haven't even talked about. But he evidently borrowed $500 million from J.P. Morgan, from UBS, and Credit Suisse.
Yes.
And this was all like a personal loan. Him personally.
Personally, not the company. Him personally. Yeah.
What does he need $500 million for?
But here's the beautiful thing is I think they were backed with WeWork shares, which never went public. So they were backed with like the future promise of WeWork shares. He's already drawn down $380 million from this $500 million.
If I had $1 million, it would transform my entire life.
If I had $10,000.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I had like $1,000, the things that could do for me.
Right.
And the fact, like, I mean, we were talking about before the whole, like, success-fail thing of, like, this kind of weird startup culture, priding failure, or repeated failure, or some kind of thing. To me, it's just inconceivable. And this has to be, then, the class difference, like, when it comes into, like, socialization. Which is, like, if you fuck up that badly with that amount of money, how do you ever recover? The fact that you could save some face and walk into a bank and be like, actually, I need some more.
Yeah.
And they'll just be like, all right. Like, what is that based on?
This guy it seems like, well, based on, as economists say, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, that this guy will never be broke again. He will never have to be worried about money ever again, even though...
Well, let's not say too much. I mean, a lot of things can happen.
We get it our way.
Well, no, that's what I was saying. All things being equal, if, a bunch of us all get together and, maybe start blocking traffic and things escalate from there, who knows where this could end. But
yeah, damn right.
to Shade's point about the class thing, what he was buying was like ridiculous, like fucking real estate. He had a 13,000 square foot house in the Bay Area with a room that was shaped like a guitar. That was $21 million.
$21 million. That's a 21.
I'm sorry. Wait.
Fuck.
Wait. I need to visualize this so I know. I have a specific map from my nightmare tonight. Okay, so internally, it's shaped like a guitar.
It had a room that was shaped like a guitar. The house itself may have, I don't know how I stated it before, but it's a huge house with a guitar-shaped room.
If you think about, where do the tuning knobs go? And there's only joists are how far apart, and how do they get the tuning knobs? And then the little,
But he's got a $10.5 million townhouse in Greenwich Village. He's got a farm in Westchester, a home in the Hamptons.
So in addition to the houses, he had the 5 houses. He had 4, I believe, office buildings that he owned that he was leasing out to WeWork. But he also had, like you mentioned, his $60 million private jet. He had that as well.
Which, as we said, he could blaze in. He had that going for him. His whole estimated worth is $2.2 billion. So this is where it all comes together, I guess, because we're thinking like, what's the point of this fucking company? And it's so ridiculous. It's so obnoxious. Adam Neumann walks away with, a billionaire.
$1.7 billion.
He's a celebrity. And as Chris noted earlier, maybe SoftBank gets some long-term real estate out of this, but I maybe it will fail also. There are definitely some sharks involved here, and other people are left holding the bag.
Absolutely.
There'll be land issues, thousands of workers already laid off, and as we alluded to throughout this whole thing, is that they're just like, this obviously is not it. WeWork is obviously not it, and as we get closer to the inevitable recession, we're going to find out to what extent, there is a WeWork phenomenon. one of the reasons this story is so interesting to me is because my work for the District Sentinel, I follow a lot of, congressional committee stuff, and federal regulators have been concerned for some time, at least they say they're concerned. I don't know how actually concerned they are, whether or not this is just sort of cover your ass, but they've been noting, at least in the public record for some time, that the corporate bond market and the market for corporate finance more generally is totally fucked up, and some ways resembling financial markets as they were right before the collapse of 2008.
I'd really like to just explain too quickly about like what it looks like to go into a recession with interest rates where they are. Well, firstly, interest rates were cut again this week, and as a quick primer for those that don't know, interest rates are basically how the federal government controls the rate of lending in the economy, and it controls the rate at which money is lent. So basically, like, how expensive is it to borrow money? Think like your credit card or your mortgage rate or a car loan. Or if you flip it around and say it a different way, how worth it is it for you to save money? What's the rate at which your savings account appreciates? And probably for most of our listeners, they've never lived in a time where it was worth it to even have a savings account because interest rates have been relatively so low for so long. So right now, the Fed cut the rate range from 1.5 to 1.75%. Think how fucking cheap that money is. Like, that's all it takes to be lent money. That's why fucking JP Morgan is lending money. That's why SoftBank is lending money, because it doesn't mean anything. It's not that expensive for them to lend it out, and it's not that expensive for Adam Newman to buy that money, to use that money. There's so much liquidity available that these companies will just fucking run at a loss all day. And fucking why wouldn't they? If they run out of money, they'll just borrow it. It's cheap as shit. And I don't really want to get into this, and this is a little bit of a conspiracy theory of mine, that Trump keeps screaming about the Fed and how they should keep interest rates low because the entire business model of the Trump organization, like WeWork, is based off of leverage, right? They're built on debt and borrowing money. So he is personally enriched by lower interest rates. But the question is, if we were to go into a recession and the federal government would want to make things easier to stimulate the economy, they would lower interest rates. But the interest rates are already this low, sub fucking 2%. So where do we go to ameliorate the economy if shit fucking tanks?
Well, the quantitative easing was already is theoretically what the central banks would do. But even then, and Janet Yellen, obviously more of a liberal than Jay Powell, the current Trump-appointed Fed chair. But Yellen would always say, "There's only so much that we can do," and that's a pretty grim prospect if you look at like all the dipshits in Congress and their general outlook on life.
Obviously, I think I probably speak for most of us here, and we speak for probably most of our listeners, and maybe this is just me, but like the only way that I personally see out of this is like revolutionary, right? Like there's no, or at least enormous reform in a very small amount of time, because you can quantify how many people will die from a recession, right? From lack of health insurance, lack of social services, austerity that comes after that,
foreclosures,
exactly. I mean, the amount of homelessness. I mean, one of my favorite metrics, this came out like in 2010, I think, after the 2008 collapse, from The Guardian, which said 650,000 people died additionally because of the financial crisis due to lack of health coverage. And it also noted to say that 0 people died globally. I'm talking 0 people died additionally due to lack of coverage in those countries with universal coverage.
That's pretty damning. I want to say that, low interest rates themselves, I don't think are necessarily wrong per se, but they are when the entire point of them is to just make it easier for dipshits like JP Morgan and SoftBank and whatever to play casino. I think just the huge amounts of money thrown around after the last financial crisis to basically subsidize the financial industry and build it back up to the point where it's doing the same thing over again. It just goes to show that, to the point about revolutionary change, is that I mean, I don't know. It's just maybe we could think of new institutions where we have more people's control over the financial system, so that we could be cutting huge checks for I don't know, fucking urban infrastructure, social housing, worker cooperatives, and things like that. And, you know, and even those aren't like necessarily revolutionary ideas, but they start to sort of flirt with that sort of framing when you talk about what it would take to reassert popular control over like the money market like that. Because these, you know, Jamie Dimon he'll deal with 1 million more WeWorks and 30 million more recessions.
Yes,
he doesn't give a shit. Same with Adam Newman.
He's going to be fine. He's going to be rich. And don't forget, too, like, if we're just talking stock market in general, which is just like, I don't fucking understand it as an institution, but 10% of stockholders own 80% of the shares. And the rest are like fucking 401ks and mutual funds and like our retirement, basically. And if these fucking psychos tank the economy while people are trying to retire, workers have been working for fucking 40 years to retire on nothing and then die or like move into their children's homes or something like that. The entire thing, it doesn't fucking make sense for anybody but an extremely small group of people at the top.
And then on an even more meta level, going back to that Reuters straight reporting on WeWork from 2017, Adam Newman is in this interview. He's interviewing doing a public forum interview type thing with the president of the New York Stock Exchange, Tom Farley, president of the NYSE Group, which is itself a private company, which is like looking to boost the image of these startup dipshits. For the same reason that like J.P. Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs were all telling WeWork it was worth like $100 billion. In the case of Morgan Stanley, they did actually say $100 billion. I think it's because they want the fucking business. They want the business.
Unfucking believable.
It's just wild to me that like the entire financial system is just overlapping like schemes and fucking backstabbing until it all falls apart. And then we have to like shovel like trillions of dollars at these dipshits to do it all over again. And meanwhile, new opportunities arise for assholes like Adam Newman to walk in and buy up like the ruins of your fucking city to lease out to like, you know, independent contractors who lost their permanent status because of the last fucking thing.
You know, you guys were talking about different institutions that could be reemerge, you know, as a part of some kind of rollout of like how do we prevent these things from happening, how to restructure some kind of public control over the mechanisms of finance. And you know, I mean, a lot of these ideas, as Sam, you were saying too, you know, like they're not new ideas. Like a lot of these used to be in place in different times and different eras and different you know, some of them exist in other places in the world. And, you know, to my mind, an institution that I think would be a very apt one is an institution that some of our listeners may be aware of from France in 1793, the Committee of Public Safety. I feel like that's a very effective institution to make a very clear statement about what the role of, you know, the wealthy are in society and what, you know, how we mitigate that.
What's a crazy thing about it too is like I was sending a clip of this to Dwight, and I won't read all of it, but Lael Brainerd, who's on the board of governors at the Fed, in like a recent bits in front of, I think, the House Financial Services Committee or Senate, whatever, fuck it. But she was talking about the market for corporate debt and the problems with it. And she said, literally, quote, a substantial share of the leveraged loans are like loans to companies that are already, corporations that are already in debt. And she's talking about why those are bad, why they're more worrying on a systemic level. She said a substantial share of the leveraged loans are packaged in collateralized loan obligations, CLOs.
Oh, where have I fucking heard that fucking
increased
before?
Sharply in 2018 and has since moderated somewhat. Many large banks originate leveraged loan with an intent to distribute, often to CLOs. So like literally this is what they did with the with mortgages and bundle them into a hot potato, toss them off to someone else.
Yeah. Mortgage-backed securities.
Like this is the last time. This is to guess what Dwight said. We gotta stop letting this shit happen.
Look, I'm just speculating here, but like maybe it's different for our generation because we have just like the economy has not worked for the entirety of our adulthood
so much.
And so like whereas like you know what I'm saying? Like literally the entirety of our fucking adulthood.
I remember being in college, when what a sense of dread like when the last recession happened, like being in college at the time.
I graduated in May 2008 was when I graduated. That ruled.
Dude, listen, I mean, the point is boomers and Gen X and stuff, they've seen good economies. You know what I'm saying? They've seen economies that have worked for at least some people. But like this is beyond fucking satire. And it can't go on.
Well, when baby boomers and millennials collaborate together, maybe Generation Z will become Generation We.
So you actually have to pay Adam Newman just to say that.
God damn it, you're right. I owe him fucking millions already. And the amount of times I've said we in my life, oh my God.
How do you fucking own a trademark on the word we?
Very carefully.
I just that.
Oh, that's a good bit. Chris, you should just get a trademark on a word that like the weird old right-wing boomers like to use. And then every time they like go after you, you could just be like, actually, you owe me money for that.
That's right. Look, I think this is probably a good place to wrap up here, guys. I'm thoroughly demoralized. I'm very upset. I'm contemplating legal action.
Well, one of the things we like to speculate on towards the end of these takedowns is thinking about prospective punishments for the wicked people we've discussed, and I can't get over this fucking guitar-shaped room.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, earlier point you also mentioned sharks. I know you meant that in like a venture capitalist way, but I'm just thinking regular sharks, and I'm just imagining, like you just fill that guitar-shaped room with water, let the sharks loose, and then like in The Sims, you just remove the ladder from the pool,
This might be a bit of a long walk, but it seems that Adam Newman really kind of views himself as a svelte guy, handsome guy, and a very, a fit, trim guy. And I think to really play at his ego and his kind of like frat guy douchiness, I think that he should be forever in purgatory. And since he did marry a Paltrow, he should be in a fat suit like Gwyneth Paltrow and Shallow Hal. And just for perpetuity, just consistently just run through the lines wearing a fat suit and telling female employees whether or not to get pregnant. Because it seems like that's what he's doing anyway.
What if it was just WeWork, but for a Palestinian state?
Yes.
Yeah, Palestine. We're gonna let Palestine annex all of Adam Newman's property.
Just go to a sovereign wealth fund. Sam, I really, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. It was a blast.
Thanks. Yeah, hell yeah, man. It's been a blast.
Yeah, hell yeah. It's been a lot of fun. I mean, also depressing, but fun.
Yeah, well, that's kind of our brand. Tell us where can the people find you? What do you got going on? Tell us about District Sentinel.
District Sentinel Radio. We broadcast 5 times a week, or newscasts Monday through Thursday. So we try to give you a few stories about what's going on in Washington. A lot of times we like to focus on stuff that other people aren't really talking about, because there's a lot of stuff, as I'm sure you're aware. And once a week, we throw someone in a garbage can. We have a segment called The Garbage Can, and our Patreon subscribers, they nominate people and vote on people who end up, one of them ends up in a metaphorical garbage can. We run through the indictments of everyone as to why they are nominated, etc. So that's some fun podcasting therapy for you on a Friday.
Big fan of that segment.
Yeah. So anyway, you can find us. We have SoundCloud, iTunes channel, District Sentinel Radio, patreon.com/District Sentinel. That one's an important one. And hopefully one day all the content creators will form a union to make sure that Patreon stops taking such a big cut and fucking us. But as you know, podcasts all hate each other, and unfortunately that will never happen.
We won't work.
Wow.
What do you guys think of that?
I think that's what you got. That's what you have to trade.
Wild work. I'll work on it.
We're getting there. No. We're getting there.
Guys, I know what we can fucking trademark. Stay cool, folks.
Stay cool, everybody.
Yeah. Here we are in LA, soon we gonna party. Take you back to New York, tell you how it started. Listen really close now, class is in session. The year was 09, right after the recession. Adam and Miguel and the dream starts with one floor. Had an idea that would open up a new door. They would call it green, that's new
since they were rolled out. Put some ads on Craigslist so quickly it was sold out. All about collective and never putting me first. With that as the mindset, Green Desk became WeWork. Now we down on Grand Street, the very first building. Power of community, they kinda had this feeling. We would get here one day, exploding like a firework. Following our mission to create your life's work. Every single day, man, we just try to change the world. And we never gonna stop, cause we most definitely moving all around the world. This shit is just amazing. The growth keeps building, cause we never lay back. Israel, Europe, India, now we up in APAC. And we got some haters, see what they can teach us. But we got one question, who the fuck is Regis? We don't really listen, 0 fucks when we give. Building up an empire, and next up is we live. Always gotta do it big, so these people recognize. So we form a new chief, and we call it enterprise. Corporate America, join the we movement. The rest play catch up as we keep moving. So we welcome Microsoft, Amazon, Samsung. 36,000 desks, we'll sell every damn one. Every single one of us shapes the we movement. Changing the world, that's what we are doing.